Hi, this is Charles Berman from the Bronze Age Radio and the Most Important People in the World podcast, and we've got here an interview with Pope Michael I, not the Pope you're familiar with, I think. He is considered by the Vatican to be an antipope, but he considers himself to be the one and only legitimate Pope. And this is an interview I conducted with him on the 1st of March 2008 on the Bronze Age of Radio, and he explains why he feels that he is the Pope rather than, at the time, Benedict XVI. And it was an interesting experience for me interviewing a Pope, albeit not the generally accepted Pope. And it was the first time booking him was the first time I had to write an email addressed to Your Holiness. And this was actually probably the first time I had to address someone as Your Holiness as part of the protocol they were looking for. Although, according to the Discordian religion, every man, woman, and child on earth is a pope. But here is the interview I did, again, from the 1st of March 2008 with Pope Michael I of the Vatican in Exile of Kansas, USA, from the Bronze Age of Radio. And once again, we'll be having more interviews of this style or type coming up on the podcast, The Most Important People in the World. We have with us this week a very important guest. He's Pope Michael I, and I'm going to bring him up on the telephone now. Your Holiness, are you there?
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming on the program with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Charles.
Now, you're Pope Michael I.
Correct.
And a lot of people out there, I'm guessing, will not be familiar with your holding that office.
I'm sure that a lot of people are not yet familiar with that.
Now, maybe you could explain a little bit about how you came to become Pope and why it is that you are not right now in Rome.
Okay, back in 1958, the cardinals assembled to elect a pope after Pope Pius XII died. The man they elected, Angelo Roncalli, had become a heretic prior to that time and therefore was not eligible for election. So when he came out as John the 23rd, he came out as antipope John the 23rd, leaving the papacy vacant.
I see.
Yes?
I see. And in what way had he become a heretic?
He had taught the heresies of religious liberty, that one can make it to heaven through any religion whatsoever without any exception, among other things, yes.
And all the so-called popes in Rome since then have agreed with this heresy?
They have expanded on it in Vatican II and their subsequent statements, and definitely agree with that position.
But there are a lot of people, I think one could find in the Catholic Church, who don't agree with it, but still recognize the so-called popes in Rome, including presently Benedict XVI. How do people explain this contradiction?
It's really quite simple. To be a Catholic, we have to believe everything the Catholic Church teaches us. One of those teachings is outside the Catholic Church there is no salvation. And that teaching goes back to the time of the apostles. And it can't be changed. So if you don't believe the teaching, although you may call yourself a Catholic, you've ceased to be a Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Now, the papacy was vacant because the man who was elected by the college in Rome was a heretic.
Correct.
So for quite some time there was then, according to this logic, that one has to believe and to follow the historical teaching of the Catholic Church. There was no pope for quite some time.
That's correct. For a little over 31 years, the papacy was vacant. During that time, the majority of the hierarchy left the Catholic Church, and they took their flocks out with them into what Catholics consider is a new church. They doesn't even have the right to the name of Catholic. And a few of us realized this, and starting in the mid-1970s, an effort was being put together in order to fill the vacancy. And it ran into many difficulties along the line. I joined the effort realizing it in 1987, that there was no pope in Rome, or anywhere else for that matter,
mm-hmm.
and that the church had to have a pope, and that's when I became involved in the movement. And eventually we were able to assemble 6 electors on July 16, 1990, who all accepted the Catholic faith whole and entire and proceeded to elect a pope, and I was elected that day.
Look, now I find it a little surprising that during this whole period of 30 years, during which there was no pope who followed the historical teachings of Catholicism, I find it surprising that no one else had kind of come forward and elected a pope before you.
No one else had attempted to elect a pope. Several men had claimed to be pope by divine revelation of some kind, claiming some apparition or something appointed them as pope. That's another thing. We all know popes are elected.
Right.
For most of the last millennium, it's been exclusively the cardinals, but there have been occasions in history where it's the clergy and people of Rome. During the Council of Constance, 2/3 of the cardinals that participated in that election were actually followers of one of the claimants that wasn't truly pope, because there were 3 claimants, and that's what Constance was called to end the Western Schism. Plus, that council appointed, I think it was 25 other non-cardinals to participate in that election one time only to end the schism. But it is one thing, popes are always elected.
Mm-hmm. And how did you, who participated in the College of Cardinals to elect you pope?
Well, the College of Cardinals was completely empty by that time.
Oh, so in Rome, the actual College of Cardinals in what calls itself the Catholic Church actually had no cardinals remaining from before the heresy.
There's one was remaining alive, that was Cardinal Lager in Canada, but he was a notorious modernist, so he had left the church, so we're certain he wasn't. Although he'd been validly appointed by his public heresy, he had resigned as a cardinal. The Catholic Church provides, you become a heretic, you tender your resignation to any office in the church, and the church accepts it without any further paperwork.
Oh, right. So the College of Cardinals, or what called itself that in Rome, had actually no cardinals in it.
There were no valid cardinals at that point, yes.
And does this mean there were no valid cardinals in the world, or were there cardinals? Well, I guess you had not become pope yet, so there were no cardinals.
There were no cardinals anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the first things we had to check into. If one cardinal remained who had retained his office, it'd be a simple matter. We'd go to him, and he would have to elect a pope.
Right. But I imagine a cardinal who did not participate in the heresy originally, but remained a cardinal, would not be well received in the modernist version of the Catholic Church.
That's true. He wouldn't have been. But see, by the time we get to 1990, with the exception of Cardinal Lager in Canada, all the cardinals who had been validly appointed by Pope Pius XII or before had died.
Right.
So there were none left.
So who composed the college that elected you?
There were 6 lay people who gathered that day.
Okay.
We sent summonses throughout the world to all those we could find who rejected John Paul II as Pope, because we knew they were at least possibly qualified to be electors in the election. We laid out what we planned on doing, why this was in accordance with church doctrine and church law, and how we planned on proceeding, and invited them to come.
And now, as soon as the election took place, how was that received by by Catholics around the world?
By Catholics, slowly over time they became aware of it, and a few have actually accepted the election. But what we found out is many claiming to be Catholics who had even rejected John Paul II and now Benedict XVI have also rejected at least one or more doctrines of the faith, so they're not really Catholics either.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you interested in speaking to those people who accept Benedict XVI, or who don't accept him but reject other doctrines, as you've hinted at, or are you interested in bringing them over to seeing where the true church is now, or are you more interested in just speaking to those who know the truth of where the Catholic Church is at this point?
I'm interested in speaking to both groups, because there are some who I believe accept the doctrines of the faith, They don't realize the papal election has happened because they've pulled back away from everything. But then I also have and do speak to those, especially those who reject John Paul II and Benedict XVI, trying to explain to them, yes, these people aren't popes. The Church needs a pope, and that's why we held a papal election in 1990 to fill that need.
Mm-hmm. Have you then run into a lot of opposition from people who are offended by this?
What I've run into mainly is just indifference.
Mm-hmm.
They have found their comfortable spot with either they just stay home and practice their faith at home with no priests. Some of them have found priests who were either ordained prior to the apostasy in 1958, or priests who've been ordained by the traditionalists who they consider acceptable, and they're happy where they're at and they don't want to be disturbed.
Mm-hmm. Now, since the primary reason that what's largely accepted in the world as the Catholic Church right now is no longer valid, is because of this doctrine that they put forth that it's possible to reach heaven outside of the Church. The implication of that is that since that is no longer the Catholic Church, almost nobody in the world right now is capable of reaching heaven.
Okay. Well, see, that doctrine has to be properly understood.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What we say is that everyone that goes to heaven goes to the Catholic Church. Okay? God will not hold someone responsible for a sin of rejection of the Catholic Church who doesn't realize it's the true church.
Okay.
But they're not getting saved through the Episcopal Church or as a Muslim through that religion. They're getting saved because they keep the Ten Commandments and the law which God has written on their heart.
So any good person who just does not realize that the Catholic Church is the true church, but who is a good person who follows what Jesus said, will be saved by the Catholic Church.
That's basically a good summary of the point.
Okay, but your work will largely have to do with spreading the word of the Catholic Church, or of the basically the distinction between the Church and and what exists in Rome.
Basically, my work is the same as Jesus gave the apostles. Only I don't have as much help as they had, even, is try and go bring the whole world into the Catholic Church. Because although a person can save their soul through the Catholic Church while being outside of it, they can save it much more easily by being in the Church, because there's a lot of help, the grace of the sacraments, etc., in the Catholic Church, which will be available to them.
So what would you say that your daily duties entail as Pope?
My daily duties mainly entail spreading the word through correspondence by the Internet, by talking to people when an occasion arises, writing letters to them, and in that manner.
Do a lot of people come to you through the Internet for spiritual help?
There's a growing number who are coming and they subscribe to an email list I maintain in one spot and receive regular sermons. I think a lot of people are standing back to see what's going to happen, because only a few have formally stated publicly that I am the Pope. I think there are many more who are real close to making that decision.
Do you think people are worried about retribution from supporters of Benedict if they say that you are in fact the Pope?
I think some might be, but I don't see how that church could give that kind of retribution, because it goes against one of their central tenets.
Mm-hmm.
You can be saved in any religion whatsoever. So what's wrong with being in mine? Okay.
That's a good point.
Okay. Yes.
But you wouldn't advocate for retribution against people who haven't seen the light of your papacy yet, though.
No, that is the absolutely wrong way to go.
Right.
You win converts by showing them the truth, and that this is the road to happiness in the next life, and that happiness will spill over into this life. You follow plan laid out by Jesus through his church.
So how many people do you have around you supporting your papacy?
I'm estimating about 50 worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Now there are other people in the world who also, apart from Benedict, who also claim to be the Pope. When they do that, are they doing it for largely the same objection to Rome, or are there other reasons that they do that? And how do you speak to people who support one of them?
Well, there are two different classifications. There are those who have their visions, and they've set up basically what one would call a cult somewhere in the world, and set up their own church. There's one in Palma de Torre, Spain. They now call themselves the Palmarian Church rather than the Catholic Church. But they have their own pope. They have all the trappings of Catholicity unless they've changed them. And there's another one in Canada of this kind. And people are just following them. I don't know why. I've never really had contact with anyone who's followed them. Then there's the other classification. Two other men have been elected. Linus II, who was Victor von Pence, was elected in about 1994, although his papacy has virtually disappeared. Last I heard, he's working as a bank guard in northern England with no followers. And then there is a Father Lucian Pulvermacher in Montana, he might be in Spokane now, who was elected as Pope Pius XIII. Now, in his case, he also was a heretic prior to election, and in both cases, the electors at those two elections knew we'd had an election in 1990, and they did not address our election or even contact us. So that's the first thing you have to do, and the first thing we did is we determined and proved not only is John Paul II not Pope, there is no other Pope we can find in the whole world. Therefore, we can proceed to an election. They didn't go through that step.
So they pretty much ignored your existence.
Exactly, although they were well aware of it.
Now, this might get into a fine point, but Rome says right now that you can get to heaven through any other religion.
Correct.
And the distinction would be that you actually kind of get it through it, but the other religion wouldn't necessarily stop you from getting into heaven, but it doesn't bring you to heaven of itself.
Okay.
Is that actually the distinction, that Rome thinks that other religions are just as valid as itself?
That's the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now,
in fact, they are not extremely zealous about converting people from other religions into their religion. So they will receive people in who want to come from another religion, but they don't actively go out and seek them.
So what have you done to convert people to the true Catholic Church?
In several cases, I have given them the basic instructions you would give a person wanting to enter the church. When they were prepared, I baptized them into the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Now, the church in Rome obviously has not sort of given you much recognition, but can you foresee a situation where you would be asked to come to Rome and to take the seat there?
I don't see, short of divine intervention removing them from Rome, being asked to come to Rome. Although that's where I would hope to go someday. But I believe God will have to intervene first in some manner to convince them that they're in grave error.
Mm-hmm. So you would prefer, if God did do that, convince them that they're in grave error, you would prefer to come to Rome rather than move the seat of the church to where you are?
Well, the Pope is Bishop of Rome,
mm-hmm.
and that's where I belong, so I would definitely go to Rome.
Okay. Now, do you believe that that's something that, because clearly it's traditional that the choosing of the Pope at an election, as you had, is divinely inspired. Do you believe that God would intervene in a way like that? Because you've spoken about these other these other people who claim to be Pope, apart from yourself and apart from Benedict, who claim it based on some kind of miracle. Do you believe that is something that could truly happen in this case, where God would intervene as to who is truly Pope?
That I do believe could happen, because God doesn't intervene to interfere with the election itself, because that's the method set up as election. But he will certainly intervene to assist the Pope elected return to Rome.
Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think it is, just on a larger scale? I mean, when you speak to people, why do you believe it is that if it's such and it seems to be such a clear deviation from the historical doctrine of the Church, why do you think it is that so many people have just accepted that the Catholic Church is the way that Rome has portrayed it in more recent years, and why have people been so slow to come around to your church?
I believe the main problem is indifference, which came amongst Catholics in the earlier part of the last century, before antipope John XXIII was elected. In other words, they were ready to go anywhere, and when he came in and he started relaxing things, and then antipope Paul VI virtually did away with fasting and abstinence, and they found this was an easier way of life, and now they can go to Mass on Saturday evening for their Sunday obligation, and they might not go at all part of the time, and no one really cares about that. They were just going because that's what you did. They weren't going because they truly believed in the Catholic faith. And that's the problem, is overcoming this indifference. And I think with the younger generation coming on, we're going to see that they're going to look at this and say, this is not right. Because you can take a look at the Mass they go to every Sunday, and then you get to the words of consecration. They've changed Jesus' own words from for many to for all. I mean, it's an obvious difference.
So that that variation from Catholicism, the original one, of getting to heaven, is that on an equal par, or is that greater than these other things that you've mentioned, like changing the word of Christ, which I would think would be even more egregious, or something like having Mass on Saturday evening?
Well, having Mass on Saturday evening, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
But changing Jesus' words, that is an extremely serious thing. And it's something to be expected, because by saying that Jesus died for all men, it reinforces their doctrine that you can get saved through any religion whatsoever.
So, hypothetically, let's say that the younger generation reacts in the way that you say, and they say, these heresies are not to be tolerated. But let's say instead of going to you, they try to change Rome as it is now, and let's say Rome changes its policies or its dogma back to the way it was before John. What would your reaction be to that, since you had been correctly elected? What would you say to that?
I'd say don't be deceived.
Mm-hmm.
It's a false return. They've already returned a Mass that's similar to the Catholic Mass to a number of the faithful in order to bring them back into their church. But that's only the Mass. They're not going to change the doctrine. They're not going to return to 100% Catholic doctrines. And even if they did that, which I don't expect, they ceased to be the Catholic Church long ago. The only way for them to become Catholic again is to come to the church which I run.
I see. So, in your daily operations of your church, how do you organize your followers around the world to try to expand the Catholic Church?
Well, basically, I send out sermons to them and instructions, teaching them how to pray. I instruct them on the doctrines of the faith. So look for chances with people who are questioning what's going on in the world and explain, yes, there's something majorly wrong in the world, and I know a little bit more of the story, and then bring it to them.
What do you think that is that's, in essence, is majorly wrong with the world right now?
Basically, the world has become indifferent to saving their souls.
Mm-hmm.
We've become extremely materialistic. Everyone's going after what's here, what's now. If they do go to a church, it is just to salve their conscience, make a loved one happy. Most of them are not sincere about practicing a religion. Going to church is something you do on Sunday morning, or they go to a synagogue on Saturday, or mosque on Friday. But they don't live a religion. They don't live by the tenets of their own religion if they're in one.
So what can people do if people are hearing this program and they don't agree with the heresies that that Rome has been offering, and they weren't aware that there was a church out there which has taken up the mantle that has been lost? What can they do to help support that?
Okay, they can come to the website, VaticanandExile.com. They'll find a lot of resources to explain what has happened and what they can do about it, and how they can return to the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
It's all laid out there for them to find. Then they can make contact, and I'll be happy to help them, or my secretary down in India, he'll be happy to, and help them return to the Catholic Church. Some of whom, they may say they're Catholics right now, and they're sincere in their heart, and they don't realize they've been robbed.
Right, and a lot of people, I think, would be very surprised who believe themselves to be Catholic following Rome.
Especially now, because it's gone on so long.
Right.
I mean, someone 40 years old doesn't know any different.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to invite them home. In fact, there's a man, I think he's in his early 20s, up in Illinois, and he's working very active to bring the truth of the Catholic faith to people after he found it.
Now, I imagine it actually must be difficult for an individual who says, I will now reject the false church in Rome, and I will come back to the true Catholic Church, because there is very little infrastructure around, and so where would one find a place to go to Mass?
Well, we're in that time which was prophesied in Daniel the prophet, that the sacrifice of the Mass would be totally taken away from the earth.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the time when the man of sin has come to the earth, and people are believing doctrines of devils.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't come to the church looking for an infrastructure.
Right.
We come to the church to serve God and save our own soul. And if I'm the only one in the church in the world who wants to do that, then I'll be in the church if no one else wants to. That's the attitude we have to have.
Right. So people should have, keep the faith in their own hearts, even if they can't find a Mass to go to.
Exactly.
And so is it better just to do that than to go to a Roman Mass right now and go to that Mass even though someone supports you?
No, if they support me, they shouldn't be going to a non-Catholic service.
Right.
Whether it's in the church under Benedict XVI, or an Anglican church, or a Baptist church.
Right.
I think Catholics for 2 millennia, when others departed, said, okay, we're not coming to your churches anymore because you don't have the faith.
Right. So basically, it's a very spread out church, but if people discover the truth about the true Catholic Church, that is something to keep in their hearts and to spread as much as possible.
Exactly.
So the website again is VaticanandExile.com.
Correct.
All right. Thank you very much, Your Holiness, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.
All right. Pope Michael I, thank you very much. Good evening. God bless you. That was Pope Michael I, and some consider him antipope Michael I. Actually, everyone but about 50 people consider him antipope Michael I. But I leave it up to you to decide, and I want to thank him for coming on the program. once again, if you're interested in finding out about the Vatican in Exile, it's www.vaticaninexile.com. And you can learn about the Catholic Church in Kansas as opposed to the more popular Catholic Church, which is in Rome. This is WHRW Binghamton, New York. I'm Chris, played by Charles Berman. This program is the Bronze Age of Radio. You've just heard, as I said, an interview with Pope Michael I, and in a few moments, after some announcements, we are going to hear some old-time radio. So if you want to hear it, stay tuned.